Story 1. I've written many main characters MCs about my adult life. Teaching, running a drive-through, you name it. Though I've referenced growing up with my father, this is the first time I've written about him directly. There has to be a statute of limitations on speaking poorly of the dead. If these walls could talk. Anyway, I'm about 11 years old in Germantown, the projects of Quincy, Massachusetts, living with my father. Anytime I asked about my mom, I got shot down with, "She's a crazy woman." My father had many vices, but tobacco seemed to play the biggest role in our lives and in keeping him relatively sane. Cigarettes lined up like a skeletal army, warding off the much bigger, much more formidable beasts that lay ahead. Individually, a cigarette holds minimal power, yet 1,000,000 times more power than none at all. This sad mathematical fact brings us to this story of the most malicious of compliances. When my dad ran out of the money he got from Social Security disability insurance and supplemental security income, cigarettes became a problem. Even in the late 80s, he would have me bum cigarettes from the neighbors. Some neighbors were generous. Some told me how awful it was for a father to send their child to get cigarettes. Some even threw chicken bones at me. If only I had the courage to reply, "Ma'am, I'm 11. Or at least duck. When it got really bad, he had me walk around town looking for cigarette butts that still had some tobacco left. It was a disgusting activity, but I eventually got really good at it and really sick of it. One night, he sends me off on another tobacco mission. But I'm in the middle of a game of Monopoly. I'm playing with Chewbacca, Starscream, and Megatron, and it's about to get good. I argue to the point that my dad throws a handful of dirty coins at me, yelling in his raspy, post-thyroidectomy voice, "Don't come back until you have cigarettes I can smoke." Enter MC. As blood trickles down my face, dripping onto the few dirty coins I manage to retain from their violent journey, I wonder what other crimes these coins have been complicit in. What have you done, little dime? I was done. With all of it. As an 11-year-old, I had very few cards to play, but one of them landed right in my lap. I walked in the dead of night, directly up the unnamed dirt road my dad used to drive me down while I sat on the hood, back when I was a few years younger, when I was still his favorite. Am I ready to do this? I keep walking, seeing many cigarette butts and even an uncrushed pack, ignoring them all as I head to the fire station. I know there's a payphone there, and this time my dad's going to pay. I look down at my coins, my bloody dime, and call my Aunt Stella. She told me earlier this year that anytime I needed help, I could call her. My dad always insisted I never do this or ever call her for anything, because all she wants to do is rat me out and see me in jail so she can keep you. Sounds like a plan. When she picked up, she knew right away, but I explained, in way too much detail, what had happened the last few months and then years, even including the abuse from my dad back when he was still interested in me. If these walls could talk. Anyway, I cried, and tears well up even now remembering how it all just flowed out of me like a river of garbage pouring over me. I knew there was going to be big trouble if I didn't have the cigarettes, and I told her. She risked her life driving to us, a pack of cigarettes in her hand as she picked me up and told me to stay in the car. Even through the closed windows of her Chevy Nova, I could hear her yell, "Here are your stupid cigarettes, I'm taking the kid." The saddest part was that he took the cigarettes and turned around without an argument. He didn't even fight for me. I don't know why. To this day, I even wanted him to. Aunt Stella did what I knew she would, call the cops on him and take me in. He went to jail and eventually out of state after more kids started coming forward who had been his victims. I never looked back. Who am I kidding? I've looked back every day since. Story 2. My parents had me when they were quite young. They were no longer teenagers, but had barely left that age bracket. My mom and dad met in college, which was also when they had me. While my parents attended their courses, I mostly stayed with my grandparents. The whole family lived in the same area, and the college was not far away. My parents were still young and enjoyed going out with friends occasionally. When the following incident occurred, I was a few years old. They frequented a bar from time to time. One night, an intoxicated individual inappropriately touched my mom and wouldn't take no for an answer. My dad intervened and stopped the person. Half an hour later, all seemed forgotten. The music was loud, the bar crowded, and then someone in the crowd hit my dad with an empty glass pitcher square in the face. He was bleeding profusely and collapsed. But in the press, semi-darkness, and over the music, no one knew who did it. My dad was taken to the hospital. He had a broken nose and a severe concussion. He couldn't see who had attacked him, and his memory was very fuzzy due to the alcohol and being hit in the head. Of course, they had considered the person who had harassed my mom, but they didn't know him, nor did they see him anywhere leading up to the moment. They had no evidence, so they pressed charges against an unknown assailant, but there was virtually nothing anyone could do. A few days later, the individual who had harassed my mom approached her on campus. It turned out he was attending the same college as my parents. He made a few veiled comments and left little doubt that it had been him who hit my dad in the face. The individual let my mom know that my dad should mind his manners next time. He claimed that the inappropriate touching he had done didn't hurt anyone and wasn't that bad. He threatened that if he wanted to do it again, he would, and maybe more. Then the individual went on his way. My mom was horrified, of course. She went home and told my grandparents, my dad, and his parents. But no one could do anything. It was a he said, she said situation after all. My mom hadn't even gotten the individual's name. My mom cried a lot during that time and didn't know what to do. She was also afraid of going to classes or out alone. I honestly only remember that time very scarcely. I was just a little kid. But I can remember my dad in the hospital, and with his broken nose. My mom was crying a lot. My dad, of course, was just as angry and humiliated as my mom. No one knew what to do. Everyone was treading on eggshells around each other. This is where my uncle enters the story. My uncle, my mom's brother, lived on the other side of the country. He was a private investigator. He was, of course, the last to hear the full story. But the moment he heard someone had threatened his little sister, he was on his way home. After hearing the full account, my uncle knew it would likely be hard to get the individual on harassment, assault, or threats, having no evidence. My uncle had my mom point the individual out from afar on campus. It took a few days to find him, but then my uncle started to follow that person. My uncle took sick days, all his vacation, and invested every second possible to find out everything about the harasser. My uncle even approached the individual in another bar and became drinking buddies with him. Over several weeks, my uncle had uncovered all manner of illicit behavior: possession, consumption, and distribution of controlled substances, theft, and a few other misdemeanors and small-time offenses. My uncle could have put him away for that. But my uncle always said when asked about it, that if he sent the individual to prison, it would be for molesting my mom and hurting my dad, and that is what he did. One night while out with his new buddy, drinking, my uncle made the offender extremely intoxicated, and they ended up in my uncle's motel room. He got the harasser to incriminate himself on video, rattling off a list of illegal activities he was involved in. My uncle had, of course, pretended to be a criminal too. Among the stories, the individual told the story of how he groped someone and hit her companion with a pitcher of beer. Now, something needs to be said. In my country, of course, recording someone in secret is illegal, and under some conditions, like if the police do it, it is not a permissible piece of evidence in court. But as a private investigator, my uncle knew the laws for that exactly. Paradoxically, the situation is different if it is not only audio but also video. My uncle had the individual on camera confessing. The next day, my uncle turned himself into the police with all his collected evidence, because secretly filming people was still a crime, though the video could be used as evidence in court, as my uncle was not affiliated with the police or any other governmental agency. When the criminal trial and the civil trial were over, the offender received 6 years in prison and had to pay damages to my mom and dad. My uncle was fined the equivalent of $2,000 for secretly filming the individual. Money well spent, he always said. Story 3. It happened a few years back, before all the craziness with the pandemic hit. My husband and I had just moved to a new town for his job. We didn't know anyone yet, and I was struggling with my social anxiety more than ever. The unfamiliar surroundings and faces everywhere made even simple errands feel overwhelming. That day, we needed to stock up on groceries and household items for our new place. I'd been putting it off, but we couldn't delay any longer. So, we headed to the big discount store in town, you know, the one with the blue logo and always packed parking lot. As expected, the store was bustling. Just being there made my heart race a bit, but I tried to focus on our list and get through it quickly. My husband, bless him, knows how I get in crowded places. He kept things light, cracking jokes about the random stuff we'd find in the aisles. Finally, we got everything we needed and made our way to the checkout. That's when things got interesting. The lines were incredibly long. I counted at least 8 people behind me, and I was probably 4th or 5th from the front. My husband, noticing how warm it was getting in the store, offered to grab us some drinks for the drive home. I nodded, grateful for a moment to collect myself. As I stood there, trying not to make eye contact with anyone, this woman appeared near the coolers by the register. She was probably in her 50s. With that, I want to speak to the manager haircut. At first, I didn't think much of it. She seemed to be browsing the drinks, but then she put her hand on my cart like she needed to steady herself. Not wanting any confrontation, I nudged my cart back a bit to give her space. I figured she'd grab whatever she needed and move on. But she didn't. She kept pretending to look in the coolers, all while inching closer to my spot in line. The line crawled forward, and I was now 3rd in line. That's when things got weird. This woman, let's call her Karen, because that's exactly what she was, suddenly grabbed the end of my cart. She held on tight and started yelling to someone across the store. I looked over and saw this huge guy heading our way. He must have been at least 6 feet tall and 300 pounds, with an actual neckbeard. I'm not making this up, I swear. Karen, come over here, right here. She was motioning for this guy to cut in line right in front of me. Now, remember, she hadn't said a single word to me this whole time. Didn't ask if they could get in front, nothing. I glanced behind me. There were easily a dozen people in line now, and this guy's cart was overflowing. Something in me just snapped. Maybe it was the stress of the move, or my anxiety bubbling over, but I couldn't let this happen. I pushed my cart forward, closing the gap. Me? Nope, nope, nope. Karen jumped back like I'd threatened her or something. Her mouth was opening and closing, but no words came out. She looked around, probably hoping someone would come to her rescue, but nobody did. I heard the lady behind me mutter, "Damn right." The guy behind her just shook his head and moved up. A few people even chuckled. Then the big guy spoke up. "Neckbeard, but Mom, the line is long. Where do I go?" "Karen, let's go down here." And just like that, they walked away. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Me, the person who usually avoids conflict at all costs, had stood up to this entitled woman. And I'd won. My husband returned just then, drinks in hand and a confused look on his face. "Husband, did I miss something?" I burst out laughing, the tension of the moment finally breaking. As we checked out, I filled him in on what happened. He was proud of me for standing my ground, and honestly, so was I. That day taught me something important. Sometimes you have to speak up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, and you might be surprised by how many people will have your back when you do. As we left the store, I saw Karen and her son at the customer service desk, probably complaining about the rude woman in the checkout line. But this time, instead of feeling anxious, I just smiled. Let her complain, I knew I'd done the right thing. Story 4. So, you won't believe the craziness that went down on the bus yesterday. Picture this, I'm just chilling, headphones in, talking to my primo in Spanish. We're catching up, shooting the breeze about the latest, you know? Anyway, this Karen, the epitome of, I want to speak to the manager vibes, is eyeballing me from the moment I step on the bus. Like, lady, I just want to get home without any drama, you feel me? But nah, she's on a mission. I slide into an empty seat, still chatting away in Spanish. It's no big deal, people do it all the time. But Karen, she's having none of it. She shushes me like we're in a dang library. I give her the side eye, but I keep my cool, you know? No need to start World War III over a phone call. Then, out of the blue, she snatches my phone. Can you believe it? I'm thinking, what the actual heck? My primo's still on the line, probably wondering if I got eaten by a chupacabra or something. But Karen doesn't care. She's on a power trip. She starts ranting about how this is America, and we should all speak English. Like, lady, calm down. I'm fluent in both English and Spanish. I can throw some Spanglish at you if that makes you happy. But no, Karen's not having it. She's screeching about how I'm ruining her precious American experience. But before I can even blink, she whips out her elbow like she's auditioning for the WWE and cracks it right into my rib. Oof, I'm talking major ouchies, my dudes. Now, I ain't one to start drama, but this lady just crossed the line. I look at her like, what the actual F? Karen? She's huffing and puffing like she's allergic to Spanish or something. I said, why did you do that for? The whole bus goes dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. And let me tell you, that's when things got spicy. Out of nowhere, this dude in a snapback stands up, and he's like, yo, you can't just be elbow dropping people because you don't like their language. That's not how we roll here. It's like the hero the bus never knew it needed. Karen tries to play the victim, like she's the star of her own telenovela, but nobody's buying it. The bus driver's looking at her in the rearview mirror like, you done messed up now, Karen? She starts babbling about how it's her right to speak English or some nonsense. I'm just nursing my rib, thinking, lady, I'm not trying to steal your English muffin recipe. I'm just chatting with my amigos. And then, oh boy, a whole chorus of people starts piping up. It's like the United Nations of bus riders, all saying, nah, Karen, not today. The vibe on that bus went from awkward to a full-blown protest. People were recording, others were telling her off, and a couple of folks were legit chanting, Karen, go home. Finally, the bus driver's had enough. He radios for the cops. Karen's face goes from anger to pure panic. She's realizing that her little power trip is about to land her in the slammer. The police show up, and Karen's still trying to argue her case. But the bus is like a united front at this point. We're all telling the cops how she snatched my phone, started a scene, and even laid hands on me. Homegirl's still trying to argue her case, but the law ain't buying it. The whole bus cheers as she gets cuffed, and someone yells, Adios, Karen. It was like the end of a movie where the villain finally gets what's coming. I ended up giving my statement to the police, feeling like a witness in some crazy courtroom drama. But you know what? Justice was served. The bus became a symbol of unity against Karen-esque shenanigans. I swear, it was like a movie script, but with more sass and fewer explosions. Story 5. This happened several years ago, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath. I went out to buy some things from the supermarket with my boyfriend, now husband. I looked so obviously feminine that even a less observant person wouldn't think I worked at the store. I was wearing a dress and heels, for goodness sake. My boyfriend was in a separate aisle, and I was quietly looking through the shelves for my items, not bothering anyone, when someone sharply tugged at my elbow, nearly causing me to stumble. It was a woman referred to as entitled mom, glaring at me. Her teenage child was standing behind her, looking extremely embarrassed. Entitled mom, where do I find the wine? Me. I don't know. You should ask an employee. Please let go of me. Entitled mom looking me up and down. You are an employee. Just be quiet and help me, or I'll get the manager. At this point, I had read enough stories to know how this would end. I politely told her to leave me alone and walked away. The next thing I knew, something hit me hard in the head. I genuinely thought I was dead for a second. It didn't even occur to me that something was wrong until I realized I wasn't moving, even though I thought I was. The only thing keeping me upright was gripping the shelf. There was a lot of yelling, but I couldn't focus on what was happening. Eventually, I lost the battle and passed out. When I regained consciousness, I was in a hospital. My boyfriend filled me in on what had happened. When I turned around and walked away, entitled Mom became so furious that she grabbed a glass jar and hurled it at my head. Despite her faults, she had excellent aim. The injuries were severe, and she cracked my skull open. Bystanders alerted the staff, and the manager came over. Security detained her until the police arrived. My boyfriend arrived on the scene and got me to the hospital in time. Even then, she kept saying she was trying to teach me a lesson for looking down on her. Her husband came to the hospital with their children. I don't think they were prepared to see the extent of my injuries. Her husband broke down in front of me and told me she wasn't the woman he had loved. Later, I found out through my lawyers that he served her divorce papers. Her family covered all my medical expenses without us asking. Her husband seemed like a really nice man. It's been a few years, but I always wondered why she was so angry when she clearly had a family who loved her. A part of me will always wonder that. Eventually, she was charged and sentenced to prison. The case actually wrapped up a few weeks ago. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison on multiple charges. Along with her jail term and her personal life falling apart, she also had to cover my legal expenses entirely up front. Her lawyers tried every underhanded trick to prolong the case, but it ultimately backfired as she had to pay for the delays. She also had to pay for my therapy, also up front. I've been enjoying the peace for the past few weeks, staying inside with my family. For a while, I had memory issues that slowly improved. For a solid year after the incident, I couldn't step outside my house due to the intense fear that something or someone would attack me. With therapy, I'm better. I still can't enter grocery stores, which are referred to as department stores in the States, I think. But I'm hoping to overcome this hurdle too. My husband, the boyfriend in the story, also had to go to therapy. He still sees me lying in a pool of my blood in his nightmares sometimes. I wouldn't wish this experience on my worst enemy, even though it ultimately worked out in a way, I guess. But so many lives were destroyed because of her rage. What was she so angry about? I guess I will never know. But there are silver linings. I'm pregnant with my first child, and despite the nausea, somehow my little one is giving me the strength to overcome more and more each day. Anyway, the case is wrapped up, so I thought you might like to read this story. Thanks for sticking around. Edit. I didn't expect this story to gain so much attention. Thank you for the awards, the hugs, and the love. I am doing much better today. It's only onward from here. A special thank you to the dear friends who have shared stories of their trauma. I replied to you personally, and will say it again here. We are only as strong and capable as the people around us. When crippled with fear, I will remember the child I am about to have and your stories. Together, we will overcome fear and live with kindness and courage. Thank you for the good wishes for my baby. I call the baby Bean because it's a cute pet name, isn't it? I'm thinking about continuing to call the baby that name even after they're born. Some commonly asked questions. Did she express remorse? No, she never did. She was asked to take the stand once, and it was the only time during the trial we saw her cry and break down. But even then, she blamed me for ruining her life. There was no apology and no explanation. It was a random, brutal, and senseless act of violence designed to hurt me. How are you now? Much better, thank you. I'm still going to therapy and taking it one day at a time. My husband is better too. His nightmares have significantly reduced. One day, this will just be a scary story. Why didn't you pursue maximum compensation? For a variety of reasons. I had a good support system that rallied around me. My boss at the time didn't cut my pay. I was a valuable employee in his organization. So they gave me paid leave, so I didn't qualify for lost wages. She had to pay for my therapy up front and also my legal expenses, which were quite significant. Her husband had divorced her, so she was paying all this out of her own pocket, whatever savings she had accumulated. This shouldn't have affected my decision, but it did. Despite everything, I never wanted revenge, just justice. In which country did this happen? This case was quite famous, so forgive me for not disclosing which country I'm from. If I told you that, you'd immediately find out my name, and that's not acceptable. What now? Nothing. The last few years have been insanely crazy. My husband and I are just happy to exist with each other. Each day is a gift, and we intend to treat it as such. What happened to her family? I will paraphrase a comment I made to someone. The day her family came to visit me at the hospital was one of the worst memories of my life. I'll never forget that day. We all broke down crying, her children, husband, me, and my boyfriend. So many lives were destroyed because of this woman and her rage. At some point, her children, a son who looked around 11, and a daughter who looked around 16, came forward and hugged me as we all cried. I remember being so afraid, but at the same time being unable to move. I was literally paralyzed by fear. I didn't even realize I was crying until the children came forward and embraced me. My boyfriend was already embracing me, crying into my shoulder. Later, we found out they had paid for all the expenses I had incurred in the hospital. We were afraid this was to avoid legal recourse, but it wasn't. I genuinely believe her husband only had good intentions. After that day, I heard they filed for divorce. Her husband never came to court. After that day, we never interacted again. Her children came to court to testify, but it was obvious to everyone watching that this family was broken. The children said she was a good mother to them, but her daughter broke down crying on the stand when my lawyers asked her if she could describe that day from her perspective. It was clear she was terrified to see her mother in that light. After their testimonies, they didn't want anything to do with her or her court proceedings. Will you meet them? No, right now I can't. There are too many horrible memories. Maybe in a few years. I don't know. Edit 2. This has gained significant attention. My husband and I went through your comments. There are so many kind messages I can't reply to all of them, but please understand that I am slowly but surely going through all of them at my own pace. Thank you for all your well wishes for me, my husband, and our baby. Good night. I love you all. Story 6. My husband and I are in our late 30s and choose not to have children. Some people on a forum for those without children suggested I should post here too, so enjoy the saga. My husband and I had been saving up for almost a decade to move to a tropical paradise. About 2 years ago, we bit the bullet and moved to our dream location. Housing here is super expensive like Hawaii prices, so all we could afford was half of a duplex. It is beautiful and on the water with places for our boat. Unfortunately, Karen, Billy Bob the boyfriend, and her 3 mischievous children live in the other unit. Setup. There was a period when we just visited for a week here and there, but we live here full-time now. The entire duplex was owned by an older gentleman who rented out both sides. The sides do not match at all. One side is a 5-bedroom, 3-bath. The other side of the duplex is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. We bought the 5-bedroom. On our side of the property, we have 90% of the backyard, a gazebo, and dockage about 150 since it is on a corner. The other side has a small backyard, patio, and maybe 15 of dockage. The rental leases say the renters are entitled to their specific backyards, but there were no fences or anything, so all the renters shared the entire backyard. After we bought the house, Karen immediately tried to throw her weight around, saying they expected to continue with that privilege. I told her if she asked politely, we would try to accommodate her. She thought this meant she could use our backyard whenever she wanted. Party incident. One day, my husband and I were enjoying some drinks outside when a delivery truck showed up to set up a giant inflatable in our backyard. I asked Karen what she thought she was doing, and she said it was her kid's birthday. Then she had the gall to say it was a family and friends only event, so we had to stay inside our house, not wanting to be a total troublemaker and ruin some little girl's birthday. I told Karen that after this, she would have no access to our backyard, period. Karen shrugged and kept setting up for the party. During the party, an intoxicated adult wandered into our house, which shocked us all. I said Karen's house is on the other side, and he said, "Oh, Karen said she owned the whole property and to use whichever bathroom was available." I directed him to Karen's bathroom, and soon after, she came storming into our house, screaming about how dare we make her look bad to her friends and how selfish we are that we couldn't even spare one bathroom. She said we didn't deserve all this space with just us. I told Karen to get out of my house, or I would be calling the authorities. She finally left, and the party wrapped up shortly after. Backyard remodel. After the party incident, we decided we needed to clearly define the backyard and build a fence. While we were spending the money, we decided to update the patio, put in a fire pit, and an outdoor kitchen. While the contractor was on site, nosy Karen had to come investigate. Since the fence would be the last thing built, I was vague and just stuck to telling her about the patio update. You could see her face light up because, of course, in her mind, what's ours is hers. When the workers started on the fence, Karen came out screaming for the work to stop. I went outside and told the workers to keep working and told Karen to mind her own business. Of course, in true Karen fashion, she called the authorities. What happened next was hilarity on my part after explaining to the officer that we were building a fence on our property and the landlord, of which Karen was not, knew about it. When the officer gave Karen a stern lecture, I thought her head was going to explode. She went back into her house and slammed the sliding door so hard it sounded like something cracked. We got our fence, and I thought that would be the end, but of course not. The boat incident. One day, Billy Bob entered the picture, and he was as much a terrible neighbor as Karen. He would throw cigarette butts and empty beverage cans over our fence for disrespecting his woman. I didn't know Paradise had unruly residents, but Billy Bob is the epitome of the stereotype. Billy Bob has a boat, a 30 fishing boat to be precise. Of course, that side of the duplex only has 15 of dockage. Since we have so much dockage and only one boat, we rent out the other dockage spots on a month-to-month basis. People come and go, so if we don't receive rent from them by the end of the month and the boat disappears, we think nothing of it. We had a renter who tied up their boat on the property line, but Billy Bob wanted to park his boat and needed that space. Karen and Billy Bob posed as us, we were out of town, told the renters to be gone at the end of the month, and then parked Billy Bob's boat on the dockage. I only found out about it weeks later because the renter left a negative review on the rental site we use. They said we were rude and went back on the verbal agreement to let them stay for 3 more months. I was like, what is all this? After a phone call, I quickly put 2 and 2 together. I called the authorities, who told Karen and Billy Bob they needed to move their boat, or it would be towed, the equivalent of it anyway. Karen and Billy Bob started screaming the boat is fully on their property, it isn't. Then changed to no one can own the water, true, but a seawall is deeded, that we are liars, and at some point Billy Bob struck an officer and went to jail. I felt bad for the officers, so I took them all snacks the next day with a note apologizing for neighbor drama. I ended up winning my small claims suit against them for lost rental income, but of course haven't seen a penny. I eventually convinced the dockage renters to come back and gave them a few months free as compensation. Final revenge. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Get ready for some satisfying justice. So with the collapsing market, we were trying to figure out what to do with our savings when a perfect opportunity opened up. The landlord who owned both properties was in desperate need of some cash and was tired of managing the property from 2,000 miles away, because, of course, Karen is a Karen and called him weekly for every little thing. His only stipulation was we let the poor single mom who has been his renter for 8 years finish her lease, which is up in July. Since we just have money, we were trying to reinvest, and because now we get to control our neighbors, we jumped on that. Since we didn't need a realtor or mortgage, and an inspection had been done just a year ago for the old landlord to refinance, everything closed in just under 2 weeks. Karen was aware of a change of ownership. We registered the property under a limited liability company, but didn't know who until 8 days ago. I went over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. Karen answered with a, "What do you want, you annoying person?" I smiled, handed her our landlord information, and sweetly reminded her rent was due by Friday, but she could just hand me the check if that was easier. I've always heard descriptions of people's faces turning white, but this was the first time I have actually seen it. I told Karen that we are honoring her lease until the end of July, but afterwards she had better make plans to move because we intend to remodel before these next tenants move in. Goodbye, Karen. Edit. A lot of people misunderstood the beginning. Let's call our side of the duplex Duplex OP. The other duplex is Duplex Karen. We purchased Duplex OP. After we bought it, Duplex OP was no longer a rental. Both Duplex OP and Duplex Karen were for sale independently, but we only had the money to buy Duplex OP. Duplex Karen is still a rental because it has never sold. Now we own both Duplex OP and Duplex Karen. Duplex Karen is still a rental. Duplex OP is still not a rental. When we made property improvements to Duplex OP, it was ours and not a rental. Update 1. Not much to update, folks. Karen and the family's lease isn't up until the end of July. Rent has been paid on time. As far as I know, she doesn't have a new place lined up. We've served her 30-day notice, and we will not be renewing the lease. We also offered in writing that we will prorate July and waive the termination fee if they want to leave before the end of the lease. Beyond the near-weekly loud parties and having to call the authorities because the kids were throwing lit fireworks at our boat, not much beyond the norm. Update the 2nd of August 2020. Long story short, Karen and family are still in the place and not paying any rent. They were served with eviction, but due to health crisis-related regulations, we can't actually do anything about it. At least Karen and Billy Bob had a huge fight which ended up in him being arrested, and he hasn't returned. I've been told by our lawyer, once some laws are changed or removed in September, we can have the authorities escort them off the property that day since we've already filed the eviction. It's just a difficult situation right now. Karen is being extra smug. She tried to push her bounds and kept coming over to our property. A talk with the authorities set her straight, but she's playing music loud and just tossing her trash everywhere. We really wanted to move our elderly parents in after a quick remodel because Dad needs shoulder surgery badly and Mom now needs a walker. They need more care, and it's getting harder driving 2 hours a day to do that. Our parents want their own space though and won't live on our side with us. My husband and I are trying not to be angry and make things worse with Karen, but we are both exhausted. Things just aren't great.